Hello everyone, I'm the introverted astrologer. I hope you're all thriving wherever you are and that life is treating you well. The UK recently held its local elections and these really gave a clear message to the government. The populace have largely had enough of the Conservative government, and this has been clear for a couple of years. It's been echoed across multiple opinion polls, and there seems to be little question that the next government we have will not be a Tory government. The polls are predicting an outright Labour win, and so I really won't be attempting to predict the winner of our forthcoming general elections. But we will be taking a closer look at the charts of the two main leaders, Rishi Sunak and Kier Starmer. Neither of these leaders has actually been put to the test in a general election to date. Rishi Sunak was elected internally following the horror of Prime Minister Liz Truss, and Kier Starmer has yet to lead his party in a general election. So this is the first big public test for these two men. I've seen a couple of progressions that have surprised me, and I've also seen an incredibly strong and ruthless chart, which will be pitted against somebody who is brimming over with nervous energy and defensiveness. Which is which? Let's go to the computer and have a look. Before we get stuck into this, I'll just point out that we don't have an accurate birth time for either of these two gentlemen, so we are going to work with the noon positions. This means that the ascendant and the midheaven on the chart is not accurate, and we won't be able to use house positions. What kind of flavour does Rishi Sunak have? We can see that there's a lot of mutability in his chart because most of his traditional planets are in the mutable modality. And there's a copious amount of Earth, so his overall signature is that of Virgo. Another interesting detail that we can pick up from this chart is that there is very little water. Uranus in Scorpio is the only water planet, and it's quite heavily woven into a T-square with the Sun, Mercury on one hand and Mars, Jupiter and the nodes on the other hand. You may have noticed that his Venus is very near the end of Gemini. The noon position is around 29 degrees and 50 minutes of Gemini. Now, on the day that Rishi was born, Venus was moving very slowly. It only moved 25 minutes during the entire day. And so unless Rishi was born in the last 2 hours of the day, his Venus is in Gemini. Now, if we hone in on that Taurus sun, some essential Taurus qualities we would expect are a certain level-headedness, a practical nature. We're security orientated and we value loyalty. And so far, so good. Rishi Sunak has a banking background, which is one of those stereotypically Taurian roles. And he's part of an extended family setting where there is huge wealth. The moon could actually have been anywhere between around 16 degrees of Aries through to 1 degree of Taurus. So it's very likely that it's in Aries, and I do personally suspect that this is the case. So with that Taurus-Aries duo, we know that we have quite an active, dynamic, often quite self-orientated mixture of energies. These can be very talented people who aim high, and of course we can find successful Taurus Sun, Aries Moon examples in many different fields, ranging from sports to acting to politics. I find it's less likely that we will find them in roles which draw heavily on altruism or great personal sacrifice. Some interesting examples would be Elton John, Hans Christian Andersen, a very infamous and now deceased dictator, Saddam Hussein. So that Aries moon is going to add some dynamic and passionate energy to this chart. We seek adventure. We don't like stagnancy. We can be impulsive. And our own wants and needs are very much at the forefront of our minds. Without further information on the time of day that Rishi was born, it's hard to establish what the aspect patterns with this moon are. it does look very likely to be in an opposition to Pluto. But let's return to the Sun for the moment, because it is drawn into some very tight aspects with many other planets. And not only do we have a T-square going on, we also have a double finger of God. Now, as we can see, Mercury is very close by the Sun. It is one of Rishi's closest aspects. And this Mercury is important. Not only is there this close conjunction with the Sun, but Mercury is in a position of mutual reception with that Venus. This is because Mercury is in the sign of Taurus, which Venus usually rules. And Venus is in the sign of Gemini, which is Mercury's natural home. And so these two planets greatly help each other during Rishi's life. There's a strong relationship between them both, despite them not being in aspect to each other. And so across the symbolisms of Taurus and Gemini, we have that mutual help and reinforcement from these two planets. Now, Taurus can be resources, financial resources, what we own. Venus is our relationships, and Gemini is the background energy, focusing on communication, contacts, our mental interactions with our environment. Now, Mercury in Taurus is realistic. Decision making may be slowed slightly, but decisions are carefully thought through. We're realistic and we can make quick assessments about how functional things will be. We are able to screen out the unnecessary or the frivolous and be realistic. And with that Mercury on the Sun, we have a huge amount of mental energy. We're quite likely to take an active role in communications. And there's a danger of being over-attached to our opinions. It's as though our opinions form part of our self. We can be quite stubborn and over-attached to them. And in fact, we might not be a very good listener. Now, if we take into account the fact that this Sun-Mercury duo is in opposition to Uranus, then I think we can start to understand that this is a leader who can be very highly strung and oppositional. These are people who can anticipate opposition even if they aren't being challenged. It doesn't matter how good they are at what they do, they still anticipate challenges to their competence. There is a very highly strung temperament. And because there is all this nervous energy, we might be quite impatient, prone to irritable outbursts from time to time, because the nervous energy generated by this opposition is quite intense. I think we're already establishing that a weakness in this personality could well be their over-identification with their own opinions, possibly poor listening skills, and that inability to take other people's opinions and judgments on board. My personal view is to go quite wide with aspects to the Sun and the Moon, so I'm happy to see 10-degree orbs and would certainly take in the square to that Jupiter as being an exaggerating factor in all of this, because Jupiter will be the fulcrum of this T-square and it will enlarge the conflicts that we have in that opposition. For me, Jupiter is confirming further that we do have some overestimation of self in this. But Jupiter squaring Uranus also tells us that this is somebody with, again, that mass of nervous energy. Someone who takes risks, who likes to jump in, who has a huge motivation for success, but might not like to start out on the bottom rung of the ladder. Now, what are we to make of these yods? I personally go up to 3 degrees of orb when considering yods. And in this case, because Mercury and the Sun together are drawn into these double yods, I think we are essentially looking at a double finger of God. And on the one hand, we have Neptune. And so where the Sun-Mercury is looking to process hard facts, form opinions, and stick rigidly to them, Neptune has little time for rigidity. It is about the elusive, the mysterious, and it seeks to dissolve any boundaries. And so this is a very uneasy relationship. The Sun can also be our self-identity, our ego, our consciousness, and Neptune is unconscious. It's hidden, it's illusion and delusion. And what can often happen is that we see ourselves as sacrificing our needs for the sake of the greater whole. In other words, we base some of our ego identity on the idea that we are performing some kind of service or sacrifice. We're being the good guy. We're really deluding ourselves that we have to make this sacrifice and that we are a good egg for doing so. We fail to see that we are actually gratifying our ego and building up our self-belief on a false premise, because of course nothing would fall apart if we were to stop making these sacrifices. Above all, we would never want to be seen as being selfish. And with Mercury Neptune too, we have yet again more reinforcement of this tremendous amount of nervous mental energy and uncertainty that is generated. And on the other side of this finger of God, we have Pluto. So we're introducing a power dynamic. Pluto is things that are underground. It is our buried stuff. Power and powerlessness come into this very much. And because the Sun especially can relate to a male authority figure and potentially the father, this is sometimes a pattern that we will see where a male figure had an inappropriate influence or hold on us when we were very young, and that we ever after seek to escape from this hold, to dislodge ourselves from its power. And indeed, we have a lot to learn about power as we go through life, because we can either be pushed around too much, or we can be the one that pushes others around too much. But we anticipate danger, threat, and need to defend ourselves before anybody has even raised their fist. We're in there anticipating it already. We can be over-defensive. And at the core of this, there can also be a self-loathing with all the pressure that is being applied to Rishi's Sun-Mercury combination. The Saturn in this chart is going to help steady things. We'll see this again in a minute in Kier Starmer's chart. And it does provide that practical, steady, self-disciplined outlet through which much of the intense nervousness and defensiveness can be processed. That Virgo backdrop does mean that we have the ability to absorb the small details, and we can be perfectionist. Again, it's quite a nervous setting, and we can feel very overburdened by how much service or work that we take on. And so overwork and paying attention to our health is important. We'll pick up further on these Mars-Jupiter themes as we turn now to Kier Starmer's birth chart. Now, the more I looked at this chart, the more I was impressed by the multitude of talents, ruthlessness, staying power, determination to succeed is all woven in, and all of this under the blessing of a kite formation too. I must be upfront and explain that I will not be voting for either Rishi Sunak or Kier Starmer, so my take on this is impartial. Our initial evaluation would show us that there are more traditional planets in cardinal signs than any other modality. If we were including the outer planets, then we'd have a 50-50 spread across cardinal and mutable. And in terms of elements, we have more planets in air. So the overall signature is probably Libra, though we may consider Gemini too. And so we know the life emphasis will probably be on positions where communication and leadership are very important, and that we need to be using our brains and our communication skills, our solid ability to interact with the people around us. These are things we'll draw heavily on in our life. And the chart pattern is not as scattered as Rishi Sunak's. Largely speaking, we have a bucket shape, with most planets being placed in one half of the chart and a single planet being the handle or the focus of the chart. In this case, that Mars in Cancer is the handle to the bucket, and it also is caught up in this quite unusual and very beneficial kite formation, which draws many of the planets together to help and support each other. And one of the key points in this kite is that very close Sun-Pluto combination. This is very strong, very powerful. It is the Hades sun. So there is some overlap with a Scorpio sun. There is that deep, penetrating insight. There is an intensity and determination here that is absolutely exhaustive. And we would literally duel to the death. It is against a backdrop of Virgo in energy, so that commitment to fields of health, of service, where attention to detail is required. They are caught up in here too. That opposition to Jupiter is magnifying it, and it is also bringing in some Pisces energy, so we are not without compassion or sensitivity. And in fact, the Virgo-Pisces axis is drawing together the themes of service, work, health, and melding them together with charity and compassion for the collective, visions and ideals to make the world a better place. We are not without sensitivity. We can see the potential for a wounding related to the father figure, the son, the ego, the conscious expression. And Keir has spoken openly about his relationship with his own father, which wasn't particularly close. Whatever damage or oversensitivity may have been done in this relationship, Chiron is a key part of this kite. And so Keir would have the opportunity to introduce the healing to others as part of his life expression. What other strengths can we pick up in this chart? We don't have any planets that are in mutual reception. However, Keir does have a few planets that are in their own domain and therefore function quite easily. This would include that Venus in Libra and Jupiter in Pisces. Mars in Cancer is a different matter because Mars is in its fall in Cancer. Cancer energy is very nurturing and pro-family. It's emotional. It's not as easy for Mars to express itself here. And so we do have to be on guard against manipulation. However, I do suspect that there is a greater self-awareness than we saw in Rishi Sunak's case. Uranus is conjunct the Sun. So freedom is very important, but we can be much more conscious of what we are and what we're about with this position. Now, we can often see with a grand trine that a person has innate talents and abilities, but there is no drive or tension to seek out positions where we will be able to develop these and bring them to fruition. Whereas with the kite, we have a dynamism in it too, because it contains oppositions. And so we have the energy and the determination brought in by that Mars, the immense staying power and determination of that Pluto sun, the sensitivity and the vision that comes with Neptune, and the humanitarian goals and potentials for healing that are brought in with Chiron. That Mercury is in an air sign. That trine to Saturn is an aspect he shares with Rishi, which brings the potential for pragmatism, the long term, being able to distinguish the wood from the trees very quickly. And this is excellent for communicating too. Mercury is square to Mars, so we have a great amount of mental energy. We very likely have strong opinions, and we can hold our own in arguments. But because Mars is in Cancer, we are probably spared from that argumentativeness spilling over and deteriorating into out-and-out fights. Now, we know Keir has done very well in the legal field prior to entering into politics. He had risen to the heights of Director of Public Prosecutions. So we already know that this is a very driven, ambitious and clever personality. Friends have described him as being very compartmentalised, very driven, very focused on success at all costs, but always willing to put in the groundwork to get there. Now let's step into the future. We know that the British general election could be any time between now and January of next year. It must be held by 28th of January at the latest. And so we're going to look at Rishi and Kier's charts in January of next year. Can we pick up much from their progressions? What sort of transits will be happening? And there were a few things in this that quite surprised me. So we'll start with Rishi Sunak, who the polls are predicting to get a real hiding. We do know that he has some difficult transits unfolding, and one of them will be that Neptune is going to square his natal Venus. Neptune will be moving closer and closer as we draw into the British summer. So by July of this year, Neptune will have reached 29 degrees and 56 minutes of Pisces before turning retrograde. Something I didn't mention when we were discussing Rishi's basic birth chart is the fact that Venus has reached extremes in the declinations. She's the only planet that has done so and is over 27 degrees north. So this enhances the importance of Venus, given the fact that it is also his sun ruler and that there is a wide natal opposition between Venus and Neptune. I think we can consider that the forthcoming transiting Neptune square to Venus could be important. This transit may play out in our emotional or romantic life. There's a potential for crushes or forming new relationships that may not work out. However, Rishi is a married man, and we do also look to Venus to tell us something about the values we hold. And under a Neptune square to Venus, it may be that we have to relinquish some dearly held values because we need to discard them under the pressure of the square and change them for something that we don't wholeheartedly believe in. Venus can be finances too, and we'll have to wait and see if anything comes to the public eye relating to this transit. We can also see that Rishi will be undergoing a midlife transit of Uranus opposing its own position. This opposition will become exact this month, May of 2024, and it will still very much be in orb in January of next year. In fact, Uranus will station direct at 23 degrees and 16 minutes at the very end of January next year. Now, a key purpose of the Uranus opposition is that it prompts us to consciously evaluate our life direction. We may need to reflect on where we've been heading, whether it's compatible with our inner needs, whether we've achieved everything that we want to, where we may need to reorientate our expression. And so over the course of these coming months, events will prompt Rishi to examine these themes, to question whether doors may need closing in order for new ones to open, and to examine whether he is able to express his true self in his current life position. What we are doing is awakening and questioning whether some things will need to change in order for us to align with the needs of our true self. And we can also see that Uranus will square his north node, and the node can also symbolise our connections with the world. So this could be disruptive for Rishi. Now, as transiting Jupiter moves out of Taurus and into Gemini, by the time we get to September, it will have begun to form a square transit with Rishi's Saturn and a trine with his Pluto. And I think that square to natal Saturn will be a point where Rishi starts appreciating that something is very wrong. There is a blockage, a limitation, a difficulty that he becomes more keenly aware of. The trine to Pluto may give some additional energy to allow him to work with and control this problem. And it will certainly bring a drive to transform and try to gain control over it. And so September may bring some interesting developments. This transit doesn't complete until around April of 2025, so this should be well after the election. If we turn briefly to Rishi's progressions, I know we're hampered by the lack of an accurate birth time, but regardless of what point in the day he was born, we can see that in the lunation cycle, he is in the phase that we call the progressed gibbous phase. This marks the period in this major life cycle where the progressed moon is just a few years away from the time when it will exactly oppose the progressed sun, i.e. we are aiming for a full moon in the lunation cycle. We're not there yet, we're just in those few years leading up to it. Now, during the progressed gibbous moon phase, our horizons are expanding and expanding. We're taking on new things. We're actively seeking out new experiences. We're looking for challenges. We're developing our strength. And there is a feeling inside that we are heading towards a culmination, an achievement. And that achievement is whatever is unveiled at the time that we enter into the full moon phase. In Rishi's case, he won't reach the full moon phase for a couple of years yet, even if he was born early in the morning. But nonetheless, we know that the internal environment is one of expanding and reaching for ever-dizzying highs. And it's quite interesting to note the direction of the planets at the time of Rishi's birth. In other words, were they retrograde or direct? And have they changed? Planets don't often change their positions in our progressions during our life, and so it's very important when they do. And Rishi actually has 2 changes in planetary motion, but not until 2027. And at this time, his Mercury will turn retrograde in May of 2027, and Pluto will go direct in September of 2027. So during that few-month period, we could see big changes in Rishi's life. Returning to the current time, we can see that the noon position for progressed Mars is 22 degrees and 9 minutes of Virgo. What this tells us is that Mars is going to be around the area of a square with his natal Neptune. Now, Mars and Neptune are not a combination that you would really want leading up to an election. A Mars-Neptune contact tends to muddy the waters. We may be attempting to sail our ship in a straight line, but Neptune is blurring and obfuscating our vision. So we have to be very careful to stay true to our course, not to be tempted to alter our direction to suit others, or to compromise on values or actions that we hold dear in order to please others. It's a slithery, slippery combination, and not necessarily a very honest one. And we can also see that Mars being implicated in the solar arc directions. Solar arc directions are where we move every planet, including the outer planets, around the chart by 1 degree roughly for every year of life. And using this method can help us predict actual events. Solar arc Pluto is at 2 degrees and 23 minutes of Sagittarius in January of 2025. And so at some point we know that it is going to form a square aspect with that natal Mars. The square is not the important issue, it's the combination of Pluto and Mars together that is pivotal. So this is very dynamic, very determined, very ruthless, and this is not a bad combination to have in the lead up to an election. Will this help him at all against the competition? So let's kick off by looking at Kier Starmer's progressions. If we take a look at his progressed sun and his progressed moon, we can pick up which part of the lunation cycle he is in. And in Kier Starmer's case, he is in the progressed crescent moon phase. This is the period where the moon is heading out and will be making a square to the progressed sun in the not too far away future. We have emerged from the period in our life known as the new moon, when we weren't sure what the next direction should be. This can be a period characterised by some indecision and disorientation. But by the time we are moving into the progressed crescent moon, we have an idea of where we're going. This can be a time when we have to put in very solid, hard work in order to climb in the desired direction. We are still relatively inexperienced. We are experimenting and we are learning at great speed. So this can be a time in our life when we need to rely heavily on the tuition and guidance of people around us. We have an idea of what we want, and we appreciate that it may come with a steep learning curve. I was also quite surprised to see that Keir's progressed Mars is also approaching a square to his natal Neptune. And so, similar to Rishi Sunak, we have the direction that we're heading in, the aim, the goal, the course of action that we feel we should be taking. We have it muddied and clouded by Neptune. And so achieving our goals may be more difficult, but it may also be that we are willing to bend, adapt, perhaps even be a little underhand or manipulate our genuine values in order to achieve what we want. Knowing that the pair of these politicians have this aspect going on, I shall be watching them both very closely as we near the election. I think we all know the tricks and tactics that politicians can use in order to get the number one spot. However, Keir's progressed Sun is also moving to conjunct that Neptune. This is because his progressed Sun and his progressed Mars are drawing into a square. So we have intense dynamism, energy, determination, the ability to enter into conflict. This is all part of Keir's inner emotional unfolding. This isn't necessarily an outside event because it is an aspect formed between progressed planets. And that progressed Sun is going to conjunct Neptune. Now, because we only have the noon position for his Sun, the progressed Sun could in theory be anywhere between about 10.5 degrees of Scorpio and 11.5 degrees of Scorpio in January of 2025. But the essence of this is a certain dreaminess, an elusiveness. We may not commit to actions that we had previously signed up to. We could be a little disorientated, and we may find it difficult to commit to things that we would previously have set in stone. So these are quite interesting progressions, I think. We are also going to see Keir's Mars feature in his solar arcs. In Kier Starmer's natal chart, his Mars is the only planet that has reached extremes of declination, and so it is important for that reason. And his solar arc Mars is set at around 8 degrees 26 minutes by next January. Now, on the day that Keir was born, Mars moved around 38 minutes during that 24-hour period. This means that the position of his solar arc Mars could be anywhere between 8 degrees and 7 minutes and 8 degrees and 45 minutes, depending on which part of the day he was actually born in. So this is something that will be probably coming into fruition post-election. And because it will be conjuncting the Sun and Pluto, we know that there's a tremendous amount of energy, drive, determination and exhaustive capacity to work. And we would expect any events that are associated with this very dynamic contact to be unfolding within a year or so after Keir takes up position, if the polls are correct. Now, Keir doesn't fare too badly from transiting planets leading up to the election and into 2025. It may well be that transiting Jupiter will trine his moon over the coming months. We just can't be sure of the position of his moon. It seems more likely than not. And so we have that increased optimism and expansion, happy, positive energy. There are no stressful Saturn contacts, and Neptune and Pluto too are not going to be bothering him for a couple of years. It's a shame that we don't know the ascendant and midheaven position because they would reveal so much about the forthcoming election. On the basis of his planets alone, what we can see is that if he is successfully elected as Prime Minister, more substantial challenges or difficulties may arise, probably going into 2027. And this is because Saturn and Neptune will both have moved well into the sign of Aries. And so they will be catching his Mercury-Mars square Potentially transiting Saturn could catch his moon too. But there are other reasons why things could become more stressful, and that is because transiting Pluto will be moving through early Aquarius, and so will at some point conjunct that natal Saturn. And 2027 also marks a year when transiting Uranus, bringing so much change, disruption, will be well into the sign of Gemini, and so it will start to square parts of that kite. The Sun Pluto opposing Jupiter will be under pressure from Uranus then too, and so 2027 could be a much more challenging year for Keir. I hope you found that illuminating, but what a shame we don't have an accurate birth time for either Sunak or Starmer, and of course we don't have a formal election day yet either. But when we do, I'll be able to look at the planetary positions on the day as well. In my next video, we'll be rushing across the ocean. We're going to America, and we're going to revisit the forthcoming November election. Astrologers are very divided on the relative strengths and weaknesses of Trump and Biden. I have already given an initial take on the matter. However, we will look into this again using deeper dive techniques and probe further. And until then, take very good care of yourselves, and God bless you and your families. Bye-bye.